I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So Microsoft has done a study on this, and various employment agencies like Robert Half has done studies on this, and Kronos has done studies on this, that a 4-day work week actually does lead to not only the same productivity as a 5-day work week, but significantly up to 40% more productivity. Because I guess people are more relaxed, they're happier, and they cite all these things, that their quality of life is better, so they work harder.
Well, I just think when you're in the shower, when you're on an airplane, when you're in a time in which somebody is telling you, this is time in which you cannot be productive. You can't be. You can't sit here and write emails. You can't do cold outreach. You can't whatever. You don't have access. Your brain feels relieved of this idea of like being focused on trying to create something, and or get specific work done. And as a result, it's able to wander and come up with different ideas and this kind of thing. And I think that a lot of people would be better served by having some of that time than having to be in an office thinking about like, how do I look productive, or how do I look like I'm working hard, or how do I create this next idea or whatever.
Brendan, we're going to talk about you think it's better, and I agree, by the way, you think it's better if we have a 4-day work week than a 5-day work week. I totally agree. I did my homework on this, but let me hear what you have to say about the 4-day work week.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the best situation would be
you just don't want to work. Period.
I really don't.
Can I have a day off every week? That's your goal.
I'm not even gonna hide it, dude. I feel like this will be terrible for my like hireability moving forward.
Like people will say, hey boss, that guy you just interviewed, did you hear his episode on the James Altucher show? He kind of said he doesn't really want to work, so I don't know if we should hire him.
I think I do. I just think, all right, so here's what founds this is I'm writing this whole tons of comedy about work lately, because I feel like the work is changing. Everybody's like, everything is changing. But like, there's so much evidence to show that you just shouldn't be working as much as we're working, that like, so just to start this conversation off, one of the first bits that I discovered, not even doing that much research into this, was that the average American who purportedly works for an 8 to 9 hour day actually, according to studies, only accomplishes between 3 to at most 5 hours of work.
I think that's being very generous.
Oh, it's got to be hugely generous. I think that the average person probably only gets done 2 to 2.5 hours of work a day. I think that meaningfully moves the needle forward.
Yeah, like I worked one job that was a cubicle job in an IT department in a Fortune 500 company, and I couldn't even understand what was happening. Like, people would get in at 10 a.m., then they'd go for a smoking break, then they'd go for a 2-hour lunch, then another smoking break, and then the day's over. And then there'd be meetings, because meetings I don't really count as work. Like,
No.
there'd be meetings every day.
But they just take up, they're a waste of time.
Yeah.
And like, I just wrote a joke about this the other day. I said, like, the most difficult part of an 8-hour workday is figuring out what to do with 90% of your time. Like,
Yeah.
you just, and the other 10%
Oh, yeah, by the way,
is,
then they're surfing the web now,
Yeah.
like the social media. I mean,
if you are employing someone and you give them a computer, you are paying them to learn how to get better at looking up cat memes. Like, there's the whole workday is just sitting down and figuring. I mean, like 90% of every office job I've had, and this is at companies where I've led teams that have created millions of dollars of pipeline and then have created, therefore, lots and lots of realized revenue. 90% of my day is figuring out what the hell I should be doing, or what the hell anybody should be doing.
So for me, I don't know about 90%, but I feel like a big
Okay,
chunk
maybe
of,
not
but a big
90%.
chunk of that 90% would be I never wanted to go to the bathroom, because everyone on the floor is sharing the same bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to go to the bathroom next to my boss or the cubicle person next to me. Like,
Yeah.
that's disgusting.
But James, how do you watch episodes from Netflix if you're not in the bathroom at work?
Well, I would map out all of the available bathrooms within a 2 or 3 block radius.
No,
'Cause
you
I worked in
wouldn't.
New
Would
York
you
City.
really do this?
Yeah, yeah. So I worked on 42nd and 6th, and the New York Public Library was kind of down the street.
Yeah.
And I would sometimes I'd have to run there, and on the 4th level basement. You know, these libraries have like all these basements with
yeah.
like the antique and rare books.
Yeah.
I'd find the most obscure basement level, find the one bathroom there, and it was nobody even knew it existed.
Yeah.
And I would just stay there, like not watching Netflix then, but like reading rare and antique books for an hour in the bathroom. So
This is a blog post that's yet to become viral. Is the best public bathrooms to visit in Manhattan.
yeah, I feel like almost like it was a Seinfeld episode. I think George did actually make this kind of map, but I really was terrified of going to the bathroom next to my boss. But back to the 4-day work week. You know why there's a 5-day work week?
I think you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's because Henry Ford, he ran a study that showed that people were more productive if they only worked 8 hours and if they had 2 days to get off.
I think you're correct, and I think he was building off of the fact that there was never really more than a 6-day work week, because Sunday was a day
always,
of rest.
yeah.
But then some companies around the turn of the 1800s to 1900s were like, well, we want the Jews to work as well, and we're gonna only be able to hire them if we give them Saturday off. So it became Saturday and Sunday.
Huh.
And so it's just sort of arbitrary. But then some studies have
I
kind
would
of
say Henry Ford did not do that. Henry Ford, known
Right, Henry Ford
anti-Semite.
hated
Yeah.
Jews, so he didn't give a shit about that. But did he actually support Hitler? I don't know.
I'm sure he didn't say a lot of strong words against him.
Steve, do you know?
I know he didn't like Jews. I know that much.
I think I don't even know when he was.
Well, let me tell you, Henry Ford missed out because there are some great Jews.
Exactly, he missed out. Yeah. Well, anyway, we're not gonna go down this whole path. But
I mean, can you imagine Henry Ford having to work that hard to just keep his? I mean, if he had liked Jews, he wouldn't have had to hire so many accountants. That was terrible. That was a bad joke.
We can work on it though. We can workshop that. But
You can edit that out.
you know, Hitler in 1933 said, "I don't care if Germany gets a few years behind in science. We're just getting
Did
all
he
the Jews
really
out."
say that?
Yeah, yeah. And
Wow.
And because all the Nobel Prize winners at that
Yeah.
point, like think of Einstein,
What is-
they were German.
Sam Harris has this great quote where he's like, if you were to, he goes, just judging through the Jews that came to America after the war, the amount of scientific progress, like it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like,
And missiles and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But
anyway,
but Henry
we're
Ford,
way off topic.
5-day work week. But there are studies that show if you give people a 4-day work week, because of the reasons you just said about productivity, that people aren't really that productive anyway. On a like I was about to say, well, maybe they need that 8 hours to find the right 2 hours to work, but I think that's BS. That's giving people too much credit. So Microsoft has done a study on this, and various employment agencies like Robert Half has done studies on this, and Cronus has done studies on this, that a 4-day work week actually does lead to not only the same productivity as a 5-day work week, but significantly up to 40% more productivity, because I guess people are more relaxed, they're happier.
Yep.
They cite all these things that their quality of life is better, so they work harder during those 4 days.
I just think so. If I had it my way, I thought about this. If I had it my way, I think that if I was running the first thing I need to say is, even if I was CEO of a major corporation, I would also maybe be not sure if I would do this, but because it feels like there's just so much culture around this constant, like, and I say 40 hours of work, like nobody who's in an office works 40 hours. You're working 45 to 50 hours normally. But if I was CEO, I think if I could design it and I knew, and the data showed that it would help work, what I think I would do is I would have 4 days of work, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
Ugh, why the middle of the week? Because don't we want like the 3-day
weekend? I mean, whatever. Maybe I'd do like flex time. You can take Friday or Wednesday off. I think for me, I feel better if I have 2 days of work, then I take a day off, then I have 2 more days of work. But I would also limit, I would say you're 6 hours a day, and of those 6 hours, only 1 hour can be meetings. Because it forces people to figure out what the heck they need to have decisions on. Most of the meetings that I've ever been in have been basically crowdsourcing decisions and trying to figure out like different ideas. And if you don't come to that meeting prepared, or if they don't come prepared, it's a complete waste of time.
Yeah, I can't actually think of any meeting that's been ever worthwhile. Like even when I used to, I used to run a hedge fund, and I would have to fly to different places as I was raising money. But half the job of running a hedge fund is raising money. And never once have I flown to any place and actually had a successful business outcome from it. Like maybe it's because I just wasn't good at sales or whatever, but there's plenty, you kind of need to just find the opportunity where you are. Like traveling is, well, traveling sort of proves this point though about the 4-hour work week or 4-day work week, because when you travel, you're essentially skipping that whole day.
Oh yeah.
If you're flying to Chicago or even California from New York, that day is shot.
Done.
And you kind of, it's not like you land and say, oh my gosh, I'm a full day's work behind. I've got to catch up on the weekend.
Yeah.
You actually find that you didn't miss anything.
No.
I've never missed one thing by traveling during the work week.
And I've never been able to be productive really on the road, but like most of the best creative thinking I've had has come from one of 2 places. It's either been me in the shower or me on an airplane, because I'm like, I don't have anything to do. And this was before, mostly before I was doing most of my travel for sales. And I was still doing comedy at the time. Before Wi-Fi was on airplanes. Like that just came out, like when I was doing a lot of this stuff, which actually makes me feel old. This is the first time I've ever felt old.
We have just aged you. Everybody else in this room is older than you. Now you're one of us. It's like you're gonna be.
Is this how it feels?
You're gonna be undead soon. So it's like we're gonna suck the blood out of you in podcast after podcast until you leave here super tired and wondering. And you're going to be like all pale, your hair's going to be gray, and we're all going to look younger.
It's going to be
we're going to steal your youth and vitality.
It's going to be like that scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
So
I feel like that someone can GIF my face and put it on r/watch people die inside, because it's
while doing this podcast.
Yeah, while doing this podcast. So anyway, where I was going with this was I'd have to get out a notebook and like creatively write and just whatever. And when you're in an airplane, there's nothing to do. So and a lot of that stuff is like when you are because here's what's happening. When you're in the shower, when you're on an airplane, when you're in a time in which somebody is telling you, this is time in which you cannot be productive. You can't be. You can't sit here and write emails. You can't do cold outreach. You can't whatever. You don't have access. Your brain feels relieved of this idea of like being focused on trying to create something and or get specific work done. And as a result, it's able to wander and come up with different ideas and this kind of thing. And I think that a lot of people would be better served by having some of that time than having to be in an office thinking about like, how do I look productive, or how do I look like I'm working hard, or how do I create this next idea or whatever.
Well, I guess Google was trying to sort of incorporate this idea by saying to all their employees, 20% of your time should be on your own projects outside of what your job is for Google. And that's how Gmail was created, for instance. It was in some guy's other 20% where he was just fooling around and he decided to make Google email.
Yeah.
And so they sort of had this idea in a different way. But compare it to like the 4-hour work week. So Tim Ferriss's idea Tim Ferriss was like running himself ragged, running this nutraceutical company that he started. And he was just having like breakdowns because he was working too hard. And he realized, there's this notion, the 80-20 rule, that 20% of what you do actually creates 80% of the value.
Yep.
So he figured if I could identify the right 20%, I only need to work, 8 hours. He even wanted to call it, I think he wanted to initially call it the 2-hour work week, but his publishers thought it was too much. So I might be wrong. He mentioned something like that to me. But so he figured out the 4-hour work week with the 4 hours would be the ideal amount of time to get 80% of the value of his work. And he figured he didn't need the final 20%. So if he was making $200,000 a year, say, with this company, okay, he could make $160,000 a year, but work only 1/5 the hours or 1/10 the hours. And then I think a lot of times people interpret that to mean then the rest of your time you spent just goofing off. But his whole point is that you could then spend the other 36 hours doing the equivalent of that 9 more 44-hour work weeks. So you get the work done of 9 people.
Well, Steven Kotler, who I think
who's coming here tomorrow.
Yeah, you're going to interview soon. I'm a huge fan of his. I connected with him on LinkedIn because I read his Rise of Superman. One of the things he's fond of saying is when you're in a flow state, you're 500% more productive than you are when you're not in a flow state, which basically means if you are able to get into a flow state, let's imagine you spend 6 days of your week goofing off, doing whatever, and then through some marginal amount of low-level intensity work, figuring out how you should arrange your 1 day of work, then you hit that 1 day and you're 500% productive. You've done the entire work week in 1 day.
And to his point, and to the guy, I can't say his last name ever, Mihaly, whatever, who wrote...
Csikszentmihalyi.
That's how you say his last name?
I think that's how it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think. I hear this on every podcast, by the way, and people are like, how do you say his name? I think that's how you say it.
If all you know is have this one skill of saying his name, you could probably get on every podcast to talk about flow.
Oh,
but
yeah. I'll expect to see me on every one in a week then.
He wrote the original book on this, I guess, in the early 90s. And his point is that, so because people always say, well, how do you get in, either how you get into flow, or in the Tim Ferriss example, how do you find the right 20%? Because it's not like you just do 1/5 the work and you get 80% of the value. You kind of have to find the 20% that creates the 80%. And that's sort of the hard part. It's very hard to predict in advance. But his point in the original book on this is that the more competent you are at something, the more likely you are to end up in flow. So, for instance, it's a great example among chess players is that chess players can sit at a chessboard for 6 straight hours looking at positions in tournaments, and they reach this flow state in there. But they're more likely to hit that flow state the higher ranked they are. So the more competent you are, the more you're able to kind of filter out the 80% that's not important. So you can focus on the 20% that are, and then you're more likely to hit that flow state where you're 500% more effective.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main, that's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out.
Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
Well, let's flip this around and talk about just in terms of performance. There's two examples I can think of, which is one is comedy, which I know we have in common, which is that one of the things like you're talking about and what Csikszentmihalyi talks about in his book is like you're filtering out the information that's not important, which is like I don't need to care about these pieces on the board because I know these are the critical pieces. That's what a chess grandmaster is thinking, or just knows in his or her bones or their bones. Anyway, the comedian is like the same thing. Like I just hosted a show at an arcade bar in Chicago last week. And it was really crazy. There's arcade games playing. There's like all this stuff. There's so many distractions. And I remember I hit this point where I was on stage because I hosted the show. So I had to take the bullet basically and trying to create a space in which a show can occur with all of that distraction. That was my responsibility. And the way that I did it was I've done comedy for like 18 years and I just knew what I had to do to overpower this room to get their attention. But I couldn't pay attention to the TV playing or the arcade game. I just knew I got to connect with and lock in all these people in the show. And I know that I have the ability to do that because I've been doing this long enough. That's when the flow state kicks in.
Yeah, because then if you're, for instance, listening to the TV while you're trying to figure out how to make so-and-so laugh in the front row, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to be distracted. So you kind of like filter out, you kind of like make sure you're only focused on the distractions that will move you forward.
Yeah.
And you know how to do that because of competence.
Yeah.
So if someone just like randomly arrives or let's say someone's learning how to dance tango, if they're trying really hard to remember every step and every arm movement and every thing, they're not going to be able to do it. They're definitely not going to be able to reach a flow state. But if they're really competent tango dancer, they know the music, everything's perfect, they'll be able to do everything without thinking, and that's this flow state.
Yeah, I'd say like for anybody who's learned a new language, and I have another point to make about this when it comes to work, and I'll flip this around in a second, but for anybody who's learned a new language, my competency with French came in when I got drunk and my inhibitions went away, and then I began speaking French very fluently and clearly to people.
So go to work, get drunk, get trashed, and you know exactly what to do from that point. You're pee on the boss's desk and get fired. And
you heard it here first.
But competence is an interesting thing because then you fall under like, well, does it take 10,000 hours to have competence, like Malcolm Gladwell says, or what is? Like Tim Ferriss with his nutraceutical company, he had been doing it for several years, so he was competent enough to know what the right 20% was. And by the way, that applies to everything. Like 20% of the employees do 80% of the work in a big corporation. 20%. 20, and it was first noticed, I think, because someone
Pareto.
Yeah, he noticed that 20% of the seeds planted in the garden resulted in 80% of the
yield.
flowers. And then
Yeah.
he found out that this kind of occurs in almost every area of nature and life,
Yeah.
this 80-20 rule. And by the way, you could square it so that, ultimately you could see that like the right 1% equals essentially about 49% of the value.
Yeah.
Like you keep square, like 80-20 squared times 80-20.
5% results in 95% of the value mostly. Yeah, but let me flip this back because let me say another thing that Tim Ferriss talks about, because one of the things I noticed, I've worked with a lot of startups in my sales career, and one of the things that I noticed that a lot of entrepreneurs or people who are just starting companies do is that they tend to focus on lots of things that are distractions. And then it's like they get a lot of they get great ideas.
Totally. I agree with this.
They get a ton of great ideas, but they're like, you have to triage your ideas and figure out what do you need to focus on and in what order.
Right. Like in this context, a lot of people say, ideas are a dime a dozen, execution is everything. The problem people have actually is not on the ideas part, and not even on doing execution. They don't know what execution to do. They're not very good at effective. There's a spectrum of good execution to bad execution. And if they're not competent and know what they're doing in terms of executing, they're going to do the wrong 80% and not the 20% that's most effective.
Yeah. I mean, think about dancing the tango. Like there's a handful of different steps that you can do. You can be individually great at each one of those movements, but if you don't place them together correctly, you're just going to throw your partner around the dance floor and trip over yourself. But like to back up, one of the things that Tim Ferriss talks about that I think applies here is that the availability or abundance of a resource, the amount of infrastructure that grows around a resource is proportional to its availability. So if you have a lot of something, then we will have complex structures that will evolve around it.
So what do you mean? What's an example?
So the example in this case is time. So Tim, when he learns a new skill, he gives himself a date at which he's like, I have to get this. Here's the time in which I have to perform well on this, because it forces him to reverse engineer a series of like, how do I break this down in order to get good at this? And that's the thing with the 10,000 hours rule, I think, which is like, if you want to be a virtuoso, having 10,000 hours of completely uninterrupted, I'm just doing golf all day or whatever, you're going to get, or comedy, I'm going to get into a place in which I'm going to be unstoppable because I've been in so many situations that I now know in my bones how to do this. But like taking stand-up comedy as the example, the 80-20 of stand-up comedy is like, look, if you want to do a 5-minute stand-up comedy bit, write a bunch of these jokes, cut them down so that the distance between the setup and the punchline is as short and as clear as possible. Now get in front of a mirror and do this with yourself, record it 100 times and listen back to it, and then just clear it up. Now get on stage and do it. That's it. You're a stand-up comic now. You've got 5 minutes of material.
Right. And the way you just described it, though, let's say someone is not competent at learning something, they're not going to know, okay, I need to videotape myself. I need to look at it. I need to cut out these words. So they might spend a lot of extra hours doing, why aren't people laughing? I thought this was funny. Instead of kind of what you just did was essentially find the 20% that gets you 80% there to being a stand-up comic, as opposed to just thrashing around looking for the right techniques to do it, as opposed to just trying to be funny at an open mic, which is never going to work.
Yeah, yeah. If you can be, I feel like if you get up and you can be funny at an open mic, especially if it's just in front of other comics, I feel like you're already a virtuoso.
Which never happens.
Never happens. It doesn't happen to almost anybody. But I mean, like, well, you talked with Andy Duke about this. Like, a good way to cut past a lot of this stuff is to figure out, who do I talk to? I mean, at least in the 10,000 hours rule, is who do I need to talk to whose advice I could really use, who knows what they're talking about. And that's one way to go about it. And honestly, if you're running a company and you have a team full of people, like, you should be able to, if they have a direction, like, no one should be hiring teams of people to try to figure out what the hell it is they're supposed to do. Like, get a very small team of people to figure that out, and that's when you scale that team. And those people should be able to do that in 4 days a week.
Yeah, 4 days a week. So it might be the case, really, they only need 1 day a week, the best people. But I think, unfortunately, society is set up that everyone's going to be calling the other 4 days, like, where are you? We're all working in between bathroom breaks, like, and then we try calling you for a meeting and you're not there. So it's kind of, again, culturally, it's probably 2 or 3 days is probably optimal. All I've known is they've done research on 4 days versus 5 days, and the research seems to show that a 4-day work week is much more effective. So practically speaking, since, if you're an entrepreneur and you're working 7 days a week, there's two things. Try to get more confidence so you figure out the 20% that's right. But at the very least, see if you could trim your work week down to 4 days, because you'll probably be more effective just no matter what if you just trim your week down to 4 days.
I think that I think you should experiment with it. Like, I think, I used to do this with Quora articles, and I do this with my 10 jokes a day now, is that I limit the amount of time I have to get them done. So I would write a Quora article in 30 minutes. And if I couldn't finish in 30 minutes, I would just finish, in whatever amount of time I could. Maybe it'd be 35, maybe it'd be 40. But if I finished in less than 30 minutes, I would open a second article and start writing. But I would never allow myself to go more than like 40 minutes. It was a really short amount of time to write Quora articles.
That's a good idea too, because it probably forces you to break writer's block. Like, you just start answering.
You just got to go. Yeah. And the same thing with my 10 jokes in the morning. It's the first thing I do every morning now, and I've been doing it since the beginning of the year, is I sit down and I write 10 jokes. And I have to get done within 20 minutes. So I have 2 minutes to write each joke.
And by the way, these experiments are useful. Like, I'll just close with this. Is an experiment I did with my own work productivity. This was when I was in graduate school. I lived a 25-hour day. So I had one less day a month, essentially. But I would, one morning I'd let's say wake up at 7 a.m. and go to sleep at 11 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. The next day I'd wake up at like 9 a.m. and go to, midnight. And I would keep extending the day. So finally, so my work day for part of the month would essentially be from like midnight to 8 a.m. and it would just keep on cycling through.
I love this.
And
James.
it was great. It was really effective, because then your schedule, you don't fall into any bad habit. Like, people say have a routine. You don't actually get into any bad habits in your routines, because your schedule vis-a-vis your friends and your coworkers and your peers and so on is different
Constantly
every single
shifting.
day.
Yeah.
And so it actually allows you that time, like you said on the airplane, to be productive and creative in odd moments of the day when you weren't expecting it.
Well, this is fascinating to me. First of all, I love this idea, because that is your schedule equivalent of your hair. That is just like you.
It's the 25-hour hair.
Yeah. It's just looking at your schedule. You'd be like, of course, only James would do this.
Because no one really wants to deal with me anyway. So this was my excuse for being having no friends. Well, I'm living a 25-hour day, so who am I going to have dinner with at 10 a.m.?
I can just imagine. No one wants to hang out with me, and your psychologist is like, why? And you're like, well, first of all, I have a 25-hour day.
I'm eating steak at 6 a.m. in the morning, and no one is joining me.
This is oh my God.
And drinking heavily at 4 a.m. So we're all in bed.
I don't know. That's like drinking heavily at 4 a.m. is normal in an Irish family. So let me just say this also, though, which is like, that's so fascinating, because that's the schedule that you probably got extremely good at managing your time, because that is the schedule equivalent of keeping your body off balance, which is like Bill Burr does this on stage with comedy, is like, he'll choose things that will alienate the audience from him because he wants to win them back over. You're purposefully messing your schedule up almost every day in order to work through figuring out what times are going to be useful for whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but I was consistently writing 3,000 words a day, which is about 10 pages a day.
Yeah.
So, and I've done that since then, but I haven't consistently done that since then. Like, then it was for years and years. I was writing 3,000 words a day while I was doing this experiment.
Yeah. Well, this is like, I think that's the kind of thing, just to return to, like, you have to have enough knowledge to know what the 80-20 is. It's like, that's the 10,000 experiments idea, which is like, just throw out all these different things until you start getting enough data and feedback to know where those 80-20 thing is going to be, basically.
Which could lead to working 4 hours a week or 4 days a week or 25 hours a day. But the whole idea is play around and experiment with these things. The 5-day work week is just arbitrary, kind of like most things in life.
Yeah.
Where they're just sort of like defined, like someone defined it because of like, the religious holiday, one group is this day, and we can't deal, just take both days off. Like, we don't care. Yeah. And it was just sort of arbitrary. So do you ever read these, this will be fine. You ever read these things like why the train tracks are a certain number of feet apart, like each rail on the train tracks?
No.
It's all related to how, it all goes back to how the width of horses on Roman roads.
Really?
And that it kind of defined the width of roads, and then eventually you could trace it. If you Google this, you can see it traces all the way back to, or up to, how wide train tracks are spaced.
That's fascinating. It's a good thing that Tim Cook didn't exist when trains were being made, or every year train tracks would be a different width.
Is the iPhone different with every time?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, just the charger, everything. He's just going to, I'm glad Jay got it. I feel like he's the only one who got that joke. But
Jay started laughing. All right. Brendan, thanks so much. The 4-day work week and everything else.
Thanks, James.
Did you know that franchise owners are more likely to start a successful business than entrepreneurs who go it alone? Neighborly offers 19 premier brands with services that repair, maintain, and enhance homes. With Neighborly, you'll get the business model, marketing resources, and corporate support you need to pursue a rewarding future. Learn more about joining over 5,000 Neighborly franchises by downloading your free guide at go.nbly.com/podcast.